Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We have an absolutely unprecedented breaking news situation unfolding right now, a story that is currently sending massive shockwaves through the entire global community, completely shattering everything we thought we knew about the established hierarchy and the unwritten rules of this industry. We are looking at a scandal of epic proportions, a moment in history that will undoubtedly be studied in boardrooms and courtrooms for decades to come. If you are just tuning in, you are witnessing the real-time collapse of one of the most significant alliances we have ever seen, brought down by a single, devastating piece of communication. Within the last 24 hours, a highly confidential, internally circulated document, now universally being referred to as the Bolbol Memo, has been completely exposed to the public. And the contents of this memo are nothing short of explosive. Bolbol, a figure and entity long associated with strategic patience, calculated maneuvers, and absolute operational security, has taken off the gloves in a way nobody could have possibly anticipated. Bolbol has issued a direct, uncompromising, and ruthlessly explicit memo to Kume. And the central accusation? Bolbol has officially and formally labeled Kume as being fundamentally, unequivocally criminal. Let that sink in for a moment. This is not a subtle corporate disagreement. This is not a minor dispute over contractual obligations, nor is it a simple misunderstanding regarding revenue splits or strategic direction. This is a direct allegation of criminal behavior, put into writing, and fired directly at Kume's executive leadership. The absolute audacity of putting such a nuclear claim into a documented memo is staggering. In the world of high-stakes operations, you do not use the word criminal lightly. The word carries legal weight, it carries immediate reputational destruction, and it invites the immediate scrutiny of regulatory bodies and law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions. For years, the relationship between Bolbol and Kume was viewed by outside observers as the gold standard of synergistic partnership. They were the unstoppable duo, the twin pillars holding up a massive infrastructure of innovation and market dominance. Whenever Kume pushed the boundaries of aggressive expansion, Bolbol was there to provide the structural foundation and the logistical genius to make it happen. They operated in total lockstep, or at least, that is the meticulously crafted illusion they fed to the public, to their shareholders, and to the media. But this memo utterly obliterates that facade. It exposes a relationship that has secretly degraded into a toxic, highly paranoid, and deeply adversarial Cold War. The immediate fallout has been absolutely catastrophic. Within minutes of the news breaking, we saw an immediate and violent market reaction. Confidence is plummeting, partners are frantically scrambling to distance themselves, and emergency board meetings are being convened globally as we speak. Everyone is asking the exact same questions. What specific actions did Kume take to push Bolbol to this extreme? What evidence does Bolbol possess to justify the use of the word criminal in an official capacity? And perhaps most importantly, is this the end of Kume as we know it, or is this the opening salvo in a brutal, scorched-earth war of attrition that will bring both of these titans crashing down to the ground? We have to understand the psychology behind this move. Issuing a formal memo of this nature is a point of no return. Bolbol knows that by putting this in writing, they are legally binding themselves to this accusation. If Kume is not actually engaging in criminal activity, Kume now has grounds for one of the most lucrative defamation lawsuits in modern history. Therefore, we can safely deduce that Bolbol is not bluffing. Bolbol must have a mountain of irrefutable, completely damning evidence. They must have paper trails, digital footprints, whistleblower testimonies, and financial records that paint a picture so undeniably corrupt that their legal counsel signed off on drafting this explosive document. The language used in the leaked snippets of the memo is incredibly precise. It does not use vague terms like unethical, inappropriate, or out of compliance. It uses the specific, legalistic terminology of criminality. This implies systemic fraud, potential embezzlement, severe regulatory violations, or perhaps even something far darker and more deeply embedded in Kume's operational framework. It suggests that Kume has crossed a line from aggressive business tactics into the realm of outright illegality, acting with a sense of impunity that Bolbol could no longer tolerate, or perhaps could no longer be legally complicit in. This brings us to a critical theory. Why now? Why did Bolbol choose this exact moment to strike? The timing of this memo is almost certainly not a coincidence. It reeks of preemptive self-preservation. In the complex web of their partnership, liability is a shared burden. If Kume has been secretly operating a shadow ledger, manipulating data, or engaging in illicit activities, Bolbol would eventually be caught in the blast radius when the authorities inevitably close in. By issuing this memo, Bolbol is effectively blowing the whistle on their own partner. They are drawing a line in the sand, establishing a paper trail that proves they discovered the criminality, confronted it, and condemned it. It is a desperate, highly aggressive move to secure immunity or leniency before the real storm hits. The ripple effects of this are going to be monumental. Every single contractor, every subsidiary, every single individual who has ever done business with Kume is currently sweating bullets, wondering if their ledgers are going to be subpoenaed in the coming weeks. The sheer volume of wealth, influence, and proprietary technology tied up in the Bolbol-Kume dynamic means that this is not just an isolated corporate divorce. It is a systemic shock event. And Kume's silence in the immediate aftermath speaks volumes. In a crisis of this magnitude, the standard operating procedure is immediate denial, followed by aggressive counter-messaging. The fact that Kume has not yet retaliated with a comprehensive public defense suggests complete internal panic. They are likely locked in war rooms with their crisis management teams and defense attorneys, trying to figure out exactly how much Bolbol actually knows, and how much of that information has already been handed over to the authorities. The walls are closing in, and the absolute magnitude of the situation is only just beginning to become clear to the public. Now that we have established the sheer scale of this breaking news, we need to dive deep into the underlying mechanics of this unprecedented conflict. To truly understand the gravity of Bolbol formally accusing Kume of being a criminal, we have to forensically deconstruct their entire history, their operational methodologies, and the hidden vulnerabilities that have finally ruptured. Let us start by analyzing the operational dynamic that defined the Bolbol and Kume partnership before this catastrophic breakdown. On the surface, it was a relationship built on complementary strengths. Kume was the aggressive, forward-facing entity. Kume was the face of the operation, prioritizing rapid expansion, high-visibility acquisitions, and absolute market saturation. They were known for a ruthless corporate culture that prioritized results above absolutely everything else. Bolbol, conversely, was the architect of the back end. Bolbol handled the infrastructure, the intricate financial routing, the data management, and the crucial regulatory compliance that allowed Kume to operate at such a breakneck speed. This division of labor created a very specific vulnerability: asymmetric information. Kume generated the momentum, but Bolbol possessed the map of where all the bodies were buried. Every transaction Kume initiated had to flow through the architecture built by Bolbol. Therefore, if Kume began to engage in activities that stepped outside the bounds of legality, they had to either bypass Bolbol systems, which is incredibly difficult to do without raising red flags, or they had to rely on Bolbol looking the other way. For a long time, it appears Bolbol did exactly that. In the pursuit of exponential mutual growth, blind eyes are frequently turned. Minor discrepancies in accounting are written off as rounding errors. Questionable offshore wire transfers are categorized as necessary operational expenses for international expansion. The culture of looking the other way is deeply ingrained in highly profitable partnerships. However, there is always a threshold. There is a tipping point where the reward no longer justifies the immense legal risk. This leads us to the core of the deep dive: what exactly constitutes the criminal behavior outlined in the memo? While the full, unredacted text of the document is still secured behind layers of legal protection, sources close to the situation, combined with behavioral analysis of Kume's recent market activities, point to three major areas of likely criminality. First, we have to look at extreme financial obfuscation, specifically relating to revenue recognition and investor disclosures. Kume has been under immense pressure over the last 4 quarters to demonstrate continued, unrealistic growth to maintain their inflated valuation. When organic growth stalls, desperate entities frequently turn to synthetic growth. This involves creating incredibly complex networks of shell companies, phantom vendors, and circular transactions to artificially inflate revenue streams. They effectively move the same money in a giant circle, recording it as new revenue at every stop. Bolbol, managing the financial architecture, would have absolute visibility into these circular transactions. They would see that the capital flowing into Kume's primary accounts wasn't coming from actual clients or legitimate market activities, but rather from Kume's own secondary and tertiary shadow accounts. This is textbook wire fraud and securities fraud. If Bolbol realized that Kume was using their joint infrastructure to perpetuate a massive fraud on investors, Bolbol would have an absolute fiduciary and legal obligation to halt the activity, lest they be charged as a co-conspirator under RICO statutes. The second area of potential criminality revolves around unauthorized data harvesting and illicit monetization of user privacy. In the modern economy, data is more valuable than capital. Kume's aggressive expansion relied heavily on user acquisition, but more importantly, on extracting maximum value from every single user. There have been persistent, quiet rumors for years that Kume's internal data practices were highly invasive. If Kume escalated these practices from aggressive terms of service violations into outright illegal wiretapping, unauthorized intercept of communications, or the covert sale of highly sensitive, personally identifiable information to unsanctioned third-party actors, perhaps even state-sponsored entities, this would represent a massive criminal liability. Bolbol, operating the servers and the data flow, would eventually detect the anomalies in the data egress patterns. They would see massive encrypted payloads leaving the network destined for blacklisted IP addresses. Confronting Kume about this, and being ignored or threatened, would absolutely trigger the kind of desperate, self-preserving action we see in the memo. The third, and perhaps most explosive possibility, involves outright bribery, corruption, and the violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Kume has recently expanded aggressively into highly volatile, emerging markets known for deeply entrenched corruption. To secure the necessary permits, infrastructure rights, and regulatory approvals in these regions, massive amounts of capital are often required to grease the wheels. If Kume's executive team was caught actively funneling massive bribes to foreign officials through the financial channels managed by Bolbol, the legal exposure is unimaginable. The Department of Justice does not play games with international bribery. If Bolbol discovered that their systems were being used as a conduit for international corruption, issuing a formal, documented memo condemning the actions is the absolute minimum requirement to avoid catastrophic federal prosecution. They had to put it in writing to prove to investigators that they were not the architects of the bribery ring. Now, let us examine the specific wording of the phrase, being criminal, as utilized by Bolbol. It is a fascinating grammatical choice. It does not say, committing criminal acts, or engaging in illegal behavior. It states Kume is being criminal. This phrasing suggests something deeply systemic and cultural. It implies that the criminality is not an isolated incident, an accidental oversight, or the rogue action of a mid-level manager. It suggests that the entire executive ethos of Kume has become fundamentally corrupted. It implies a corporate culture where laws are viewed merely as suggestions, where regulatory fines are simply priced in as the cost of doing business, and where the end always, without exception, justifies the means. When an entity's core identity becomes criminal, rehabilitation is impossible. You cannot negotiate with a partner who fundamentally operates outside the bounds of the law. Bolbol realized that any further association with Kume was a direct threat to their own survival. The memo is not a warning, it is an execution order for the partnership. Furthermore, we must deeply analyze the concept of the memo as a physical or digital artifact. In an era of encrypted messaging apps, disappearing texts, and off-the-record verbal agreements, the deliberate creation of a formal memo is a highly calculated act. A memo has metadata. It has timestamps. It has a specific distribution list. It is designed, from its very inception, to be entered into evidence. Bolbol did not send an angry text message. Bolbol did not have a screaming match in a closed-door boardroom. Bolbol sat down, likely with a team of high-powered defense attorneys and forensic accountants, and drafted a legally watertight document. They carefully outlined the timeline of their discoveries, they attached irrefutable proof, and they formally severed their liability. The memo was weaponized corporate governance. It was designed to immediately trigger internal compliance protocols at Kume, forcing Kume's own board of directors to either immediately fire their executive team or become legally complicit in the cover-up. This places Kume's board of directors in an impossible, terrifying situation. Upon receipt of the Bolbol memo, Kume's board is legally obligated to initiate an immediate, independent internal investigation. They have to hire outside counsel to audit their own executives. If they attempt to bury the memo, and the memo later leaks to regulators, which it clearly just did, every single board member is looking at potential jail time for obstruction of justice and breach of fiduciary duty. Bolbol essentially held a gun to the head of Kume's board of directors and forced them to pull the trigger on their own leadership. We also have to deeply consider the psychological warfare aspect of this leak. Did Bolbol leak the memo themselves? It is highly probable. If Bolbol submitted the memo to Kume internally, and Kume attempted to suppress it, Bolbol's next logical step in their self-preservation strategy is to leak it to the press. By making the accusation public, Bolbol forces the hand of regulatory agencies. The SEC, the DOJ, and international regulatory bodies cannot ignore a massive viral scandal of this magnitude. They are forced to act. Bolbol is using the court of public opinion to initiate the legal destruction of Kume. Let's trace the likely timeline of events leading up to this catastrophic rupture. This did not happen overnight. This kind of systemic breakdown requires months, if not years, of escalating tension. Phase 1 was likely the discovery phase. A low-level analyst or a compliance officer within Bolbol's infrastructure likely flagged an anomaly. Perhaps it was a series of transactions that didn't match the corresponding invoices. Perhaps it was a massive spike in data transfer to an unknown server. The analyst reports it up the chain. Phase 2 is the internal audit. Bolbol's leadership, initially skeptical, authorizes a quiet, completely covert investigation into Kume's activities on their shared network. They begin monitoring everything. They copy ledgers, they trace IP addresses, they build a shadow database of Kume's hidden activities. This phase requires immense patience and absolute secrecy. If Kume realizes they are being investigated by their own partner, they will immediately destroy the evidence. Phase 3 is the realization of the absolute magnitude of the problem. Bolbol's leadership looks at the compiled data and realizes the horrifying truth. Kume is operating a massive criminal enterprise right under their noses, using Bolbol's pristine reputation as a shield. The sheer scale of the liability hits them. Phase 4 is the legal consultation. Bolbol brings in external, highly aggressive legal counsel. The lawyers review the evidence and deliver a grim verdict. Bolbol is in extreme danger. If the government finds out before Bolbol acts, Bolbol goes down with the ship. The lawyers draft the strategy of self-preservation. Phase 5 is the execution. The drafting of the memo. The formal issuance. The complete severance of ties. And finally, the strategic leak to the public to ensure Kume cannot simply sweep the accusations under the rug. This entire sequence of events represents a masterclass in ruthless corporate survival. Bolbol has proven that they are willing to completely destroy a massive, incredibly profitable partnership and plunge the entire industry into chaos to protect their own legal standing. As we look at the potential defenses Kume might attempt to mount, the options are incredibly bleak. Their first defense will likely be to attack the credibility of Bolbol. They will accuse Bolbol of fabricating the evidence, of attempting a hostile takeover, or of trying to destroy Kume to cover up Bolbol's own massive operational failures. They will try to muddy the waters, to turn this into a complex, she said, scenario to slow down the inevitable regulatory investigations. However, this defense falls apart completely if Bolbol's evidence is as ironclad as we suspect it is. You cannot debate blockchain records, server logs, and wire transfer receipts. The data is either there, or it isn't. Kume's second potential defense is the rogue actor theory. They will attempt to scapegoat a small group of executives or mid-level managers. They will claim that the broader organization was completely unaware of the criminality, and that a few bad apples were responsible for the violations outlined in the memo. They will immediately fire these individuals, publicly denounce them, and promise to completely restructure their compliance departments. The problem with the rogue actor defense is the word criminal itself, as used by Bolbol. If the operations were massive enough to warrant this level of systemic panic from Bolbol, it is highly unlikely they were orchestrated by a few isolated individuals. Massive financial fraud and data theft require the coordination of multiple departments, sign-offs from executive leadership, and a corporate culture that encourages looking the other way. Regulators rarely buy the rogue actor defense when the rot is clearly structural. This brings us to the most likely outcome for Kume: complete and total implosion. When confidence completely evaporates in an entity built on aggressive momentum, the collapse is usually rapid and incredibly violent. Shareholders will initiate massive class action lawsuits. Creditors will immediately call in their debts, terrified of losing their capital. Top talent will flee the organization instantly, unwilling to have their resumes tainted by association with a designated criminal enterprise. Kume will be starved of capital, starved of talent, and buried under an avalanche of legal injunctions. As we wrap up this extensive deep dive into the absolute chaos of the Bolbol memo, we have to take a step back and look at the macro implications of this event. This is not just a story about Bolbol and Kume. This is a massive, blaring warning siren for the entire industry. It fundamentally changes the calculus of trust in high-stakes partnerships. Every single major entity operating today is currently looking deeply inward. They are looking at their partners, their vendors, and their internal compliance structures with extreme paranoia. The illusion that massive scale provides immunity from consequence has been completely shattered. If an alliance as powerful and seemingly unshakable as Bolbol and Kume can be violently dismantled by a single, documented accusation of criminality, absolutely nobody is safe. We are about to enter an era of extreme regulatory scrutiny, driven not just by government agencies, but by corporate entities policing each other out of sheer terror of shared liability. The era of the handshake agreement, the overlooked accounting discrepancy, and the aggressive interpretation of the law is officially over. The Bolbol memo has set a new, terrifying precedent. If you discover your partner is crossing the line, you must destroy them immediately, publicly, and completely, or you will be destroyed alongside them. We are going to be monitoring this situation hour by hour, minute by minute. The fallout from this memo is just beginning. We are waiting for Kume's official response. We are waiting for the inevitable announcement of federal investigations, and we are waiting to see the full, unredacted text of the memo itself. When that document finally sees the light of day, it will likely rewrite the history of this entire industry. I want to know what you guys think about this unprecedented situation. Do you believe Bolbol is acting out of genuine moral obligation and legal necessity, or is this a highly calculated, ruthless power grab disguised as a compliance issue? Can Kume possibly survive an allegation of this magnitude, or are we literally watching the final days of their existence? This is the most complex high-stakes story we have covered in a very long time, and the landscape is shifting rapidly. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and I will see you in the next update as this massive scandal continues to unfold.